Hello. Oops, my phone's kind of propped up here. There we go. That works. So Gary's brought up my daughter who died of a drug overdose 5 years ago several times, and he's kind of being sly about it some of the times. And, I just chose to engage. It was obvious what he was talking about. He's called me a failure. How could you fail so many times? He says I've left a trail of victim and various other things, both on the scientific topic, though it always comes up in the with his philosophy of life. But he's brought it up even in this, seems to me, in these science topic videos. And, it's obviously just an emotional thing, right? Like you drive your opponent to whatever his weak buttons it might be, and then you win. The thing is, I've taken responsibility for that, right? In just many ways, and I can't even really get into that because it's not as if he's really broaching that subject. It's a very interesting subject to me. But, like, for example, the way he uses it in the argument makes no sense. It's just to have the emotional effect on me. But even if I felt like nothing, it wouldn't mean I couldn't prove Gary wrong in every one of his philosophies. Because they're all quirky. He'll have a rough estimate of something right, but every idea he has about implementation or corollaries are all, psychotic. But for example, the fact that my daughter is gone, that does not prove that life is better not to be. I mean, the whole point of it being bad that she's gone is that it would have been better if she still was. Right? So that doesn't, and that life is terrible, and he wants to say, look how terrible life is, you should know how terrible life is. It's like, and at the same time, he's saying that I should feel responsible because I played pool, and had friends, and I drank the devil's water. I do feel responsible. Those are not the things that are really the problem, but there's plenty of things, and that's compatible with an idea that things could have been done differently, right? So it's not going to make me believe in determinism. The logic of why I miss her and why I have responsibility is all about that there isn't determinism, that things could have been done differently. So none of this argues, in favor of his position. So on the victim thing, I push back, because it's like, well, my victim at least is at peace. And, I maligned his custodianship of those cats. And he acts all put out, like, how dare you talk about the way I treat cats? He likes to call other people glib, but this is the true meaning of glib, to use my daughter's death, in his science and his antinatalism videos. That's glib. That's making light of something serious. Right? And, if it applies to him, you do anything similar, it could be about cats. And he just sees how that's wrong. But when he does it, no. And here's the thing. The reason Gary has such a negative attitude about life is because he doesn't take responsibility. He says, I rationalize, the value of life in face of its tragedies. And yet he's rationalizing why nothing is ever his fault, why the situation, the cats, nothing. And here's the thing, people run away from their own responsibilities as a self-defense measure, but in the long run, it just hurts them because they end up feeling powerless. Somebody else is always able, through some minor little thing, to cause their failure, right? That's what makes you reject the value of life in general. This feeling of powerlessness that you have brought on yourself because everything was always somebody else's fault. So I'll give you an example, just a thought example to use for reference here. Let's say you have an apartment and you decide that you want a roommate and you sublet. You interview them, you get a roommate and he ends up ripping you off. A lot of people don't want to blame themselves. Many people would just instinctively go, oh, what were this morning signs? Or I guess I better interview better. Or, they will blame themselves. But a lot of people, of course, will refuse to do that because they will act like, well, that would let the other person off. Of course, people that do take responsibility and blame themselves for the things they could have done differently, they don't let the other person off the hook. That other person, actually the danger, ironically, is that you might demonize other people because you're saying, oh, I need in my interview process to look for that kind of person. I mean, if that person had some sort of an innocent hobby, suddenly that innocent hobby might be a sign of a bad person or whatever. So you don't end up forgiving the other people. They still have the results. So you said, I brought this person into my apartment and he was a criminal. And you say, well, I need to do better next time. That allows you to move on instead of either stop doing it because it'll never work, or instead of bringing people in but never trusting them. There's things you could do to modify your behavior. I'll do this other thing. I'll get recommendations. I'll get references. Or whatever you might do in the roommate example would allow you to then, try and trust with the next person. And if you have repeated failures, you have to keep looking. Well, what is it that I keep trying to repeat? And doing that it's one-on-one with embracing the problems of living. The making of decisions, and surrounding yourself with this, that, or the other, or avoiding this, that, and the other. And Gary, as far as I can tell, I obviously we're not friends, but I've known him about as well as I've known many friends, just over 10 years. He doesn't take responsibility for the things. It's always, now granted, there's always multiple forces. There's forces against you trying to stop you from making an accomplishment, either people or just the natural difficulties of things. And so you should always take those into account. But he actually blames those, rationalizes his own decisions as the best they possibly could have been. And it was just the circumstances make it such that there is no solution, and thus antinatalism, right? And that's what makes him feel so cynical. Years and years of blaming other things, that's why, it's like if you thought the world was rigged against you and you've only ever really lived one place, that's a good reason to move. Maybe it's not as rigged in another place. Oh no, it is. It's everywhere. I'll generalize my experiences to everything being insolvable, because every single time something happens, it's an insolvable problem perpetrated by somebody else. And that's why Gary is the way he is. It's really that simple. Now, I've wondered if Gary having these problems, should I not even talk about it? Is it cruel? Because he's obviously got some emotional issues. But see, I might be wrong in this, but I don't see Gary as somebody with any more anxiety than I've had to deal with. The total difference is that, I did leave InMendham and whatnot. And, when there was some sort of destruction that, my trail passed through, I took account of my part of it. And that made me able to keep embracing life and keep searching and trying to find not necessarily perfect, but better things. And so, I have these mixed feelings about sympathy for Gary and his anxiety problems and stuff, because I think that he's pampered and babied himself. He's made an excuse for why he doesn't do more for everything around him, and he's really loud and whiny about how much it hurts his feelings to have to think about those things, and that should be good enough. That should be just as good as actually doing those things, actually being consistent, having a particular philosophy that you actually act on. And I think it really says a lot about Gary. I mean, Gary has a lot of rhetorical techniques that I think, he passes off like a magician. People don't notice that he's doing them, that he can be nice at a particular moment, that he's going to hint around something, or trying the way he tries to push your buttons and then back off and then threaten that he can push them again, and these kinds of things. It's really his entire technique, and when I said reasoning uses certain emotions, the process itself, I'm not advocating use of this kind of emotion, these petty emotions. I'm talking about emotions, feelings like curiosity, comprehension, things like that. The emotions that the brain actually uses when it's trying to be rational, not just trying to push people's buttons so that they'll collapse and go, "You're right, I'm a failure," with a line of victims, and therefore your stupid ideas are correct. It's really pathetic. Because at this point he's not doing any of these things based on his knowledge of me. It's just his rote technique. And, he kind of does it for his audience, but it's an imaginary audience, not the real one. You see how they fight with the antinatalists or anybody on these same kind of terms. It's an imaginary, it's an imaginary Nobel Prize committee that loves everything Gary does. And it's from Gary's imagination. Gary's glib imagination.